Anyway, thank you for joining us. The Columbian is pleased to welcome candidates for Lieutenant Governor. I'm Greg Jane. I'm the editorial page editor, and I'll let Craig introduce himself.
Hi, I'm Craig Brown. I'm the editor of the Columbian and Columbian.com and a member of the editorial board.
And as I mentioned before, we are recording this. We will post it unedited on our website and our YouTube channel. Let's see. So I guess we can move on to the candidates. So please take 1 to 2 minutes to introduce yourself, explain why you are running, and then we'll move on to some specific policy questions, and we'll start with Denney.
Thank you. I guess I'd like to use that time, and thanks for having me, to suggest that what voters ought to do is ask themselves 3 questions when they are deciding who to vote for in this race. The first question is, who do they think is prepared to take over the responsibilities as governor should that unfortunate circumstance occur? It's rare. It hasn't happened in 100 years, and it's not that important until it is important. But the fact of the matter is, according to our Constitution, that would happen. I would offer myself as a candidate who is prepared in this regard, having served leadership roles in the legislature, having been a chief of staff to a governor, my time at TVW, my time in Congress, and of course the last 4 years as lieutenant governor. Indeed, however, while permanently becoming governor is rare, the lieutenant governor is acting governor many, many, many days, sometimes weeks out of every year, and has all the responsibilities attendant there too. Secondly, and as a practical matter, I think the most important job, the question should be asked, who's best prepared to serve as president of the state Senate? That's a job that requires enforcing the rules and, when done right, setting a tone of respectful discourse among the members. Again, I've held the position for 4 years. I would offer my record in that regard. I am unafraid to make parliamentary rulings that are not in lockstep with the position of my own political party, because I believe the president of the Senate is the president of all the members of the Senate. And then the last question, the third question, is who uses this office wisely, judiciously, and the bully pulpit attended there too, to advance good policy in important matters. We've spent 4 years advancing the causes of civic health. We've had that conversation with you. Improved trade relations, especially with British Columbia, where we passed legislation to create an interparliamentary exchange, increasingly important as the greater Vancouver, BC economy grows. And then lastly, advancing and advocating for increased housing supply, because we have a housing shortage crisis in our state. I've been after this work since my time in Congress, when we wrote the seminal report, Missing Millions of Homes, that was the first to throw a spotlight on the fact that America as a whole, and now certainly Washington State, isn't keeping up with the unstimulated demand for housing. But those are the issues that I have used the office to advance.
Great, thank you. And Dan, why don't you introduce yourself and explain why you're running for this position?
You bet. I think you've had a little of my bio, but Jan and I have been, we're born and raised in the Pacific Northwest, in the North Seattle area. In July, we celebrated our 51st wedding anniversary. We have 4 children, and they and their spouses have given us 13 grandchildren. I'm a graduate of the University of Puget Sound in political science. I was an intern to a senator during that time down in Olympia. While I was in the Air Force, I earned a master's in public administration, specialized in urban, state, and federal governance. I was entered into law school, but applied to one airline, and that was Northwest Airlines. And that ended up being my career for 31 years. I retired as a senior captain instructor and examiner in the 747 almost right away. Went to work as a consultant to the Boeing company for 8 years in pilot instruction and leadership. During my civilian career as well, I served on a school board for 4 years, and that had a marked influence on me. I think the senator that I served with in Olympia probably had the most, because he wasn't really a politician in the sense of being a partisan, but he was a man who knew that he was there to serve the people that elected him, and his integrity spoke volumes to me. I gravitated to that as his mentorship, I guess, because my father died when I was 5.5, just 2 months before of polio, just 2 months before the Salk vaccine was released, leaving 7 kids all under 13. And I think my mom did well. All 7 of us graduated from college, even though we came from pretty humble background. And 5 of us have advanced degrees, 6 boys and a girl. My sister was a tough cookie. She became an Olympic athlete and now lives in Haifa, Israel. So both my professional career and my education, everything has brought me to, I guess, to this point. The thing that brought me into this was how much I saw was wrong in Olympia and the disservice being exacted on the public in the state of Washington. We've been subject to pretty much one-party rule for 40 years. Yet what's been happening is things have been getting worse, not better. And getting better doesn't mean throwing money at a problem, yet that seems to be the typical answer. And I'm especially distressed and actually entered the race because of the threat to families that I see when the legislature or one party declares that the state of Washington has primary role in the raising of children. I see that as a threat to parents and especially the children. And now we find that children in the state of Washington can be mutilated without the parents being consulted. That is wrong. And I just can't imagine that in a sane world this should be happening. Yet what's happening is we're out of balance in Olympia with the political structure, and politics is a pursuit and exercise of power. And power has been exercised pretty uniquely in an adverse way in many respects. We can say that who was responsible for wisely advancing good government. That's one answer. The question that wasn't asked is who is responsible for advancing what's wrong and what has been going wrong with government. And that answer rests squarely on one party for pretty much, because they have been in control, in many cases, dictating what went on without the consent or the comments. When I see in the transportation budget that a $17 billion transportation budget was passed in the Senate without allowing the participation of Senate Republicans, I scratch my head and say, who's in charge? Who's holding the gavel? And sure, you can cut off debate from the other side just about at any time. But again, using that position as a bully pulpit says that we need statesmen, we need civility for sure, and not all the partisanship and rancor that has typified what goes down at Olympia, or certainly even in Washington, D.C. And I'd like to see some thinking outside the box in that regard, because there are too many things that are challenging us today, not the least of which is excessive government spending. And if we don't stop this, we're just going to continue to expect more from the people and deliver less. So, it may be true that, somebody has wielded the gavel already, and so that entitles them to inherit the title again. But I think if we look back on the record and then we look forward on what the potential is of someone stepping in and changing the direction. In the cockpit, we had a paradigm called crew resource management, and that's team building exercise.
Dan, I'm going to cut you off there for a second,
Sure.
So we can move on to some questions. But thank you, and thanks again to both of you for joining us. Let's see. I want to start with, and Dan, you touched on many things you see wrong with government there. In that regard, what do you see as the role of the lieutenant governor? And can you imagine being able to address the issues you identified as lieutenant governor?
Well, like I was touching on there, I see the role of the lieutenant governor as being one that brings people together. In the flight deck, we brought people together with a paradigm called crew resource management, a team building exercise that brought people together from the flight deck on back. And before we departed on a flight, we reminded everyone that safety is a primary consideration. Certainly 400 and some people on a 747 in the back are entrusting their very lives to our decisions, our professionalism, and the crew we put together. And that's no less true in Olympia. So the lieutenant governor's role I see is one of a team builder, a communicator, a bridge builder between the legislative and executive branch, certainly, but also establishing relationships with just about everybody, both in the Senate and the House, so that the function and decisions of government run fluidly, and there is no lack of access for any one person or group. And I think that's a key role.
Do you think that Denney has failed to do that?
I guess the record speaks for itself. One party has certainly dominated, but you'd have to ask.
But what has Denney done specifically that has not facilitated that?
Well, the other party in my communication with, especially senators, have felt pretty much excluded. There's a little bit of access and coordination, if you will, or communication. But for the most part, many of them feel like they're along for the ride and not really regarded or even certainly sometimes respected. And I think that's a key role, is that we don't have to be just in communication with our own caucus, but the other caucus as well, the other members of the legislature, because everybody is there for the same purpose, to serve the people, not to serve a party. And so I'd like to see the partisanship significantly diminished.
Thank you. Denney, how would you answer that? What do you think of partisanship from your role?
Well, as a practical matter, as I referred to earlier, I do think on a day-to-day basis, the most important aspect of this job is serving as the president. But I want to take one step back, and I'll talk about that more in just a minute, and just observe to you that I, in many decades of intermittent public service, never encountered a position about which there are more misconceptions than the office of lieutenant governor. A lot of people carry around in their heads a couple of myths, one of which is that the lieutenant governor is the deputy governor. Of course, that's not true. They run independently. There's no ongoing portfolio of responsibility for the lieutenant governor. And then the other one, more germane perhaps to this conversation, is that the lieutenant governor is somehow the 50th state senator, and therefore can introduce bills, not true, and can vote on bills, not true, except in a tie. That's happened precisely one time in 4 years. The more important part of the job of being lieutenant governor is presiding in a fair way, in an impartial way. The truth is, you cannot do that effectively as lieutenant governor if you are not fair to all parties. And again, I'm going to offer Exhibit A and evidence of that when the majority party, my party, had a bill late in the last session relating to natural gas, by the way, and a point of order was raised by the minority party, and people were pretty shocked when I said, "You're right, Senator Short," as minority floor leader, she raised the objection. This bill is not proper for us because it violates our own rule, Rule 26. I won't hesitate to do that because of a profound belief on my part that the institution needs to have a sense that it is being presided over in a fair and impartial way in order to enable them to have the kinds of high level, based on merits and demerits, discussions and arguments about pending policy. As to directly the question of partisanship, I think as a nation, we are extremely polarized. I obviously am deeply concerned about this, or I wouldn't have spent the last 3 years of my life standing up efforts to promote civic health. And part of the way that we are polarized is along party lines. It's also along urban and rural lines. We are better off in this state than most places. We're certainly better off than we are at the federal level. That's something about which I know. It's also part of the reason why I retired from Congress, is that I found the political culture of Washington, D.C. to be progressively toxic, and it just did not suit my personal values or style. And so knowing that we are not immune from the same forces that have degraded national political discourse is why I helped stand up the Project for Civic Health with the Jackson Foundation, the Evans School, and the Ruckelshaus Center. And we've been engaged very, very aggressively in efforts to engage people, to bring people together from across the state to take up this issue. As recently, I might add, with the mini state summit just 2 weeks ago today.
Great, thank you, Craig.
So just
Sorry.
Just to follow up a little bit, Denney, you mentioned the Project for Civic Health is kind of a bully pulpit project. This is something that lieutenant governors in Washington often had a project. So Dan, what would yours be, or do you think that's an appropriate role for a lieutenant governor?
Well, absolutely, it's appropriate. It's essential to pass that down, not just from, at the way Olympia behaves, but the way civic health is both in cities, counties, and at all levels. As Tip O'Neill said, all politics is local. And certainly if we can practice that without being, like Denney said, polarized, I think that's where we are most successful. It is worth noting that on the natural gas bill, Senator Short's rule violation, that move, I guess, from the lieutenant governor came at the advice of counsel, who advised that it was an illegal motion, and that's what the council is there for, and that's what the lieutenant governor does, is access all the voices he can to make sure that he rules properly, and wields the gavel, if you will, properly. But I think that the civic health aspect of things is most essential, because what I see happening now is we're passing the torch, if you will, to the next generation, who watches how we conduct government and watches how we lead. And are we, if you will, mentoring? Are we enabling and equipping them with the tools necessary? And the most important tool is that of communication and respect and less rancor. There's a lot of dysfunction in Olympia, caused, I think, by the imbalance of one party dominating. And I think our governor has proven to be more of a divider than a uniter. And that's really unfortunate, because the dictates and the mandates that come down have polarized the people. And many people are just distrustful and resentful of government. And I think that's the role of every legislator, is to bring us together and to come together and agree that even if we have some disagreement, that we can be civil in our discourse. I think that's probably the first major step that we have to take.
So would you continue then, Mr. Heck's Project for Civic Health, or would you found your own, or find a different cause to champion?
No, I think that's a tradition. When I was an intern, gentleman John Sherberg was down there, who, though he was a Democrat, he certainly blazed a trail of civility. And that's why he was called Gentleman John, not just because of his sartorial splendor, but because he sought to rise above it. He had been a coach, and so he served for 34 years down there. So he must have been doing something right. But the big thing that he did right was not knock heads so much as just sit down with people and get to know them and get to know what was their core value, if you will, or core values, and was able to address them more in the informal fashions. He knew his people and led with the equanimity and impartiality that has been addressed here, that is so essential. But no, even expanding that civic health down to school boards. I served on a school board, and I think the idea that school boards should be dictated on high from the OSPI is absolutely backwards. I remember being on the WSSDA and actually was a federal representative, and Olympia should not dictate the way schools are run. The local school boards, they're called that for a reason. And it is a citizen's best point of access with their most valued asset, their kids. And, Mr. Reichdahl shouldn't come down and threaten 295 school districts with cutting off their funds because he has the power. That's just an illegitimate use of power. And that's the kind of politicization that is unnecessary and counterproductive to good government.
Okay, I appreciate that. So I'm kind of curious why you chose to run for lieutenant governor instead of House or Senate, where you could have introduced legislation and voted on these things.
Well, I ran for Congress 2 years ago in the 2nd Congressional District. You're probably aware of that, against Rick Larson, and had pretty much thought that I was going to be teaching others to run and all that, but it became obvious that no Republican had stepped forward for the position, and I looked at it hard and heavy, and I had thought that someone was going to, and instead I stepped in pretty much at the last moment because I thought that this is a position that needs to be discussed. It needs to be regarded as important, not the least of which, as Mr. Heck said, because of the continuity of government in case something happens to the governor. And being equipped for that role of leadership and direction, I think, is critical.
Anyway, Dan, I'm just curious, in talking about civility and the need for less rancor and office holders who bring people together, as a Republican, do you support Donald Trump for the presidency?
Yeah, I support him on balance as against the other candidate, simply because there is no other choice.
And Denney, are you voting for Kamala Harris?
Yes.
Just wanted a quick answer on that. Dan, I'm curious, talk a little more about, do you feel you would be ready if something were to happen to step in as governor? What qualifications do you have for that?
Well, I think, first of all, it's an awareness of what goes on in Olympia and also many of the players, but more importantly, being connected to the people and the issues that are facing us today. I would be reaching across the aisle to build a team that's not just Republican in nature, but would represent what the people are expecting in Olympia. And I think that most people don't know and don't care. It seems like they just let everything go on autopilot. And I don't think we have that luxury. I think we need to be engaged. I've been engaged for a long time, even as a parliamentarian at our county level. So, but as far as the governorship, I think that it's a leadership role. For a large part of my career, many people depended on my skills, their lives, and that's a responsibility you don't take lightly every time you strap yourself in. And when you think about it, my life depended on the skills that I had and what I decided. So it's a personal thing. When you hold a position of leadership, you don't take it lightly, nor are you arrogant or inflating your ego. My wife does not call me captain, and I think that we have to regard the position for what it is. It's a spokesman for the people. That is listening to the people. Like I said, my perspective is, as a Republican, is more of big citizens and small, limited, efficient government rather than big government and small citizens. And they're directly related. The bigger government is, the less citizens have liberty and freedoms. And I would project that value as a Republican in my service as governor of enabling the people to be the best that they can be, whether it's in school choice or whatever. Those need not be hot button issues unless there are players in there who like teachers unions, who see that as a threat to their power base. I don't know why. I never figured that out, because the whole goal is really educating children. I've been a member of a union for 45 years, and I understand the role of unions. I was at the picket line with Boeing just on Saturday and spoke with the guys. I know what their beef is, and I know what it's about. But I think what we need to do is really start seeing the people for what they are right now, and that's underrepresented. What is overrepresented is political agendas that do not really coincide with the people's perspective on good government. That's my take, and that's what I would bring to the position.
And Denney, you touched a little on this, but just run through your qualifications to step in as governor again.
So, since I've held over time, obviously served many terms in the State House of Representatives, where I was the majority leader. I then was chief of staff to Governor Gardner, who retired voluntarily and quite successfully, I might add. I had the front row seat, albeit in the private nonprofit sector, as the president and founder of TVW. And then, of course, I served terms in the United States Congress, interfacing with state government often, in the last term as lieutenant governor. But this is also a question of keeping oneself ready. The truth is, you can't imagine what it's like in that corner office on the second floor of the Capitol building until you've occupied it. It so happens that I've occupied the office literally adjacent to it for many years, some time ago. But even now, there are ways to keep yourself ready. Most importantly, I am constantly working to keep myself apprised as to the financial health and the economic health of the state. I only made one request of Governor Inslee, and that was to appoint me to the Governor's Council of Economic Advisors, so that I could be right next to the data and the information about how are we doing as a state. There's nothing more important for the governor to know than how is the state's economy doing? How is the state budget doing? I regularly attend, in fact, I attend all meetings of the Economic and Revenue Forecast Council, so that I will always know where we are. And lastly, I'll just say the National Lieutenant Governors Association has a go bag, as it were. Which is to say, a toolkit of things that you would have to do if you got that unfortunate call. And I regularly pull it out of the lower left-hand drawer of my desk, and I review it, so that if I should, unfortunately, ever get that call, I'm ready to go now.
Great, thank you. Craig?
I don't have another good question right at the moment.
Then we'll go to our boilerplate question that we ask all statewide candidates. Obviously, a big issue down here is the I-5 bridge. What do you see as the role of the lieutenant governor, and how would you approach that issue? And would you support any additional financing if needed? And we'll start with Denney.
So, again, the lieutenant governor doesn't vote on the transportation budget.
Right.
So I'm going to answer that question not with my lieutenant governor hat on, if I may, please, Greg, but with my hat on as born in Vancouver, raised in Vancouver, represented Vancouver in the State House of Representatives, somebody for whom I consider Vancouver to be my hometown, in which I visit often, including next Monday, to give you an idea as to frequency. And with that hat on, and also to my that I ran in 2010 for the United States Congress before we had a 10th district. I was defeated by Jamie Herrera Butler. And I would argue that part of the reason, even though it was the largest one-party landslide since 1948 at the time it occurred, but I would argue that part of the reason is I stood up for the I-5 bridge. I can remember like yesterday being at the League of Women Voters candidate forum at Clark College, and I was asked, do I support the I-5 bridge? Do I support tolls? And my position then and is now is the best, the one that can be built. And the one that can be built will depend upon tolls. I think we all recognize that by now. And afterwards, I had this gentleman come up to me and said, my name's so-and-so, I'm from the center, I'm a lifelong Democrat, liked everything but you said, except the part about the I-5 bridge, and I'm not going to vote for you. I don't regret for a minute telling the truth, and I will continue to tell the truth, because that transportation project is absolutely vital to the future of Clark County and all of Southwest Washington. And in fact, I would argue that as the single most vulnerable choke point between the Mexican border and the Canadian border, there is a national security interest at risk here. And we need to rebuild it, and we need to get on with it. And frankly, I'm pretty darn encouraged that reading in your newspaper, the EIS is due at the end of this month. So within 10 days, because we need to move forward on it.
Great, thank you. And Dan, your thoughts on the I-5 bridge?
Well, it's unfortunate that this is still being kicked around. As has been mentioned, the strategic importance of I-5 is obvious. It is part of the national highway system. And as such, first of all, should have a major outlay of federal funds for such a bridge. Whatever it takes, federal funds should be available to this to offset that. This isn't just a responsibility for the state of Washington or the state of Oregon. This is a national concern. The commerce alone that goes across there, not to mention the traffic and communication, et cetera. But I think that this really speaks also to the condition of the roads and the infrastructure of the state of Washington. They've been in tremendous disrepair, and going south, you only have to look at the ferry system and how unreliable it is to see that we've got a huge problem, not just with one bridge in Vancouver, but most of the roads in the state we're trailing way behind in maintaining our roads. The ferry system is absolutely broken. People in the islands can't even get reservations with doctors anymore because of the unreliability of the ferries. So I think there's a greater issue facing, and that's that our infrastructure is suffering. And I don't see why this is occurring. If one party is ruling, they should be able to solve these transportation issues quickly and efficiently. And yet that has not been done. And you know, there is a saying having to do with crisis, and that being that if you force someone into crisis, then you can more easily control them. And we see that being played out time and time again. And I think it's unfortunate that the different crises that is occurring, whether it's a southern border or a bridge or whatever, is driving political decisions because of the desperation of people. And the bridge has been kicked down the road far enough. We should have federal representation, senators and congressmen that address this immediately, and the state can pay their fair share. But I tend to agree with the people who don't think that tolls are necessary. That's really kicking the can down the road unfairly to the people of the state, when it is on a percentage basis much more federal.
Right, thank you. Just that's kind of our standard question. But anyway, we'll move on. Why don't give us your final pitch for why voters should support you, and feel free to mention any endorsements that you care to share. And we'll start with Dan.
Well, thank you, one and all, Lieutenant Governor Heck, and everyone who's listening, observing, and you guys certainly for your interview questions and this opportunity. I covet this because it's decision time for the people of the state, and really now we know for the nation as well. It's time for a change. It's time for a change both locally and nationally. It's time to look at what's happening, what is dysfunctional, what is wrong, what needs correcting. Whether it's increased statesmanship and civility or really decision making. Our state is in many ways in crisis with lack of law enforcement, drugs being legalized. I was a part, ironically, as an intern to that process. My senator was part of the Uniform Law Commission, and he's presented the Controlled Substances Act that was later overturned. And that was overturned because a political party saw it propitious to advance that and not fight for that. And people are suffering today because of that. All of these things say the impact on people is why we're here. And I think it's past time for change. Many people haven't voted Democrat or Republican in their life, or maybe the other way around, Democrat. They need to choose people for what they can offer: leadership, stability, and perhaps a change in direction, a change in attitude, and really building a team that can apply the necessary leadership that is needed. We have far too much politics, far too many agendas down there, and people are suffering and parents are concerned. The clear evidence is a number of people leaving our state and leaving public schools at an alarming rate because we are not answering the needs of the people. We need to do that, and it's going to require new leadership. Thank you again for the opportunity.
Great, thank you. Denney, your final pitch?
So thank you. Thanks for having us. I actually think participation very broadly already make my pitch. I guess I'd just like to observe that it has also provided us with the opportunity to see that there are obvious differences in perspective, especially as it relates to the role. But I actually would like my words to be that of taking the opportunity to acknowledge a couple of things about Mr. Matthews that I respect. I really respect his service in uniform and service during the Vietnam War and later. I deeply respect that. And I also deeply respect that he and his wife have been married for 51 years. Paul and I are not quite yet at 49. And so I'm looking forward to crossing that magic half centennial part. And I think that's something to be admired as well.
Great, thank you. Anything else?
No, thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thanks to
Appreciated
both
the
of you.
conversation.